Thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone to this joint hearing sponsored by the Select Committee on the Status of Girls and Women of Color, the Select Committee of Women in the Workplace, and the California Legislative Women's Caucus. This hearing is very important, I believe, not only to the individuals that are up here, but I believe to the women and other individuals in the audience. We continue to see challenges of women of color in the workplace, and it is important that we address this issue as we continue to move forward and create new policies that we can address so that we can create paths and remove the barriers so that women of color can start making the equal amount that their counterparts make in the workplace. We will be, in this particular hearing, compiling information and engaging in the discussions that will be taking place to figure out what the root of the problem is. I think we all know what the root of the problem is, but at the end of the day, we have to be able to show documentation that as we start to develop policies, we have to make sure that we have the argument that can move us forward. Currently, we know that women of color do not even make equal to the dollar that a white male makes. But what people don't understand or tend to not want to address is that a white woman earns 78 cents to the white male earning. An African American woman earns 64 cents to the white male earning. And a Latina woman earns 44 cents, not even 50 cents. And I will continue to use those statistics because unless we are bold and we continue to push the envelope and make sure that we here in California continue to be at the forefront of making sure that women and women of color are getting paid equally to their counterparts. Women of color are 61% of the women in California. Let me say that again. Women of color are 61% of the women in California. And we know that women of color are the majority of the individuals that hold the minimum wage jobs. And my colleague to my right has addressed this issue in various avenues and bills and policies. But what we need to continue to do is bring attention to this and keep moving forward as we continue to put policies forward. Last year, there was significant efforts by the legislature to start addressing the issues of that women are facing in the workplace. And I'm happy to see that Senator Jackson is here with us because I want to recognize her efforts and her victories as an individual, but also collectively as women here in the Capitol. She was able to get signed by the governor SB 358, which gives women in California strong protections from being discriminated against merely because they're women. And I would not be opposed to giving a really good welcome on that because that's a victory. We need to celebrate our victories because we don't get them too often.
Even if it takes 35 years.
Even if it takes 35 years, we need to celebrate our victories. So this was a big win for all of us. Which leads me to another bill, which I put forward last year, which did not get signed by the governor. But I reintroduced it this morning, AB 1676, which will prohibit employers from requiring job applicants to provide their previous salary history. And people keep asking me, well, we passed one bill. Isn't that good enough? No, it's not good enough. Not good enough if we continue to see the wage gap increase here in California. What is exciting about this bill, and it will be a push, is that as a woman, we call them applicants, but let's be real. As a woman continues to go in for an interview, if she is required to disclose her previous salary, she will never, ever be equally paid to her male counterpart. And why is this important? Because when a woman goes in and applies for a job, she will be judged on her experience, her qualifications, and the merit of her work. So what we're saying is that if this particular job has these qualifications and she fits them, then she will get paid what that job is, the amount of that job. What is interesting about this is that I had the opportunity, and I'm sure if those of you haven't had the opportunity to read the New York Times and the Washington Post, I believe my staff has those, and we did it in two ways. If you want to, you can take a hard copy or you can actually download it onto your phone. So there's two ways of doing that. And what the New York Times and the Washington Post made a strong argument for this policy, stating that one of the most effective ways to bridge the wage gap is to ignore prior salary. And I think that we look to some of our tech industries, our big companies like Google, who are already doing this, helping to reduce impact on prior discrimination by making offers based on what a job is actually worth. And they didn't state how they did that, but I think we'll look into further history on how they're able to do that. And I think the last thing that I want to leave with you before I turn it over to my colleagues is that this is a journey that a lot of you women and individuals in here have been studying. And as Senator Jackson said, even if it takes 30 years, I'm hoping that my colleagues that have 12 years here will get it done before they leave. I don't think we want to wait another 30 years to have a policy that closes the wage gap for women. And if we can do that, then we know that we will continue to create a pipeline for our next generation when they graduate, that they're on an even playing field for themselves and for their families. At this time, I'd like to turn the mic over to Assemblymember Brown, and she will give some opening remarks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Campos. You know, when I look at this issue, I have to always come back to education. Education is crucial to increasing economic security for all Californians. Achieving education beyond the secondary level is especially critical for women. Although women are now graduating from college at higher rates than men, a significant minority of female college graduates earn less than male high school graduates. Women still end up earning less than men with similar education levels over time. If we are to begin to close the earnings gap for women of color, we need to ensure that these women have access to education and training, and not just education and training, but to actually complete that education and training in fields that will allow them to have earnings that will enable them to support themselves and their families. Or they could even start their own businesses and be able to support themselves and become providers of employment. Women of color, especially low-wage earners, need to apply, and I say this because Madam Speaker today put forth an HR, for the Earned Income Tax Credit. California leaves millions of dollars behind because people don't know about the federal program or just don't apply. They don't know about the state program. If a person earns under $14,000, $14,700 as a single person, or under $47,700 as a single with 3 children, please apply. You can go to irs.gov and see how to claim the money that's been set aside for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Brown. Now I'm going to turn it over to Speaker Atkins to make some opening remarks.
Chairwoman, thank you so much, and certainly to the guests that are here and to my colleagues. It's really great to be here today. I want to commend our chair and certainly the members of this select committee. This is an incredibly important select committee, and the discussion and the dialogue that we're going to have today is of particular importance. And I know that the individuals up here have fought long and hard on so many issues, and certainly we're here today because of their commitment. So I want to commend the Select Committee. I certainly want to point out the Commission on the Status of Women and our Legislative Women's Caucus for organizing what I think is an important hearing on women of color and the wage gap in California. I know that it's going to take more than just one hearing to have that honest and productive discussion on the root causes and certainly the primary drivers of what the wage gap facing women of color are and what can be done to close the gap. For girls of color, the wage gap is also an opportunity gap. And I have to say, without the education that I was able to get, I wouldn't be here today. And that would have been certainly, I know from personal perspective, what it means not to have that access. So I want to make sure we talk about the opportunity gap. We owe it to them to do everything we can to guarantee them a fair and equal chance at economic security. Pay disparity is insidious. It's the most insidious type of discrimination, one that occurs behind closed doors, a discrimination that's hard for women to confront and harder to resolve. And that's why we still have a glass ceiling in so many of our industries, and it's why women working full-time in California still make, on average, 84 cents for every dollar. And I know that there are some women who would like to make 84 cents on the dollar, because when you look at Latinas and other women of color, Latinas 44 cents for every dollar a white man makes. And certainly we've made progress, and I want to join the ranks. I got here a little bit late, and I know that some of that was to talk about the progress in passing SB 358. So, Senator Jackson, thank you for always being so tenacious and for not giving up. But we have so much more that we can do, and we need to ensure that all women receive equal pay for equal work. I'm proud of what California did in leading the way, and it took the work not just of these women up here in the caucus, but some committed colleagues from our male colleagues, and it's good to see you here, Mr. Garcia. I'm excited at the lineup of the presentations today, and I want to thank you. I'm confident that you're going to enlighten us on further issues that we need to include and discuss as we move important pieces of legislation forward and as we keep this discussion alive. And I'm especially pleased to see along the lines of that strong labor support here today. You know, by bringing women into non-traditional jobs and creating a pipeline for women to enter the workforce through apprenticeship programs, our union partners are playing a major role in ending the wage gap. I was part of a photo exhibit in Los Angeles of women in non-traditional jobs, and that photo display is moving on to D.C. and other places. And I got to tell you, some of the women I met in non-traditional jobs were incredible. And we want to make sure that that's a possibility for more of our young women. Again, California is stepping up to lead, and I'm proud of the bipartisan work of our Legislative Women's Caucus on this particular issue, on this select committee, and again, this Commission on the Status of Women. I want to acknowledge the advocates behind the effort. You're here today, the equal rights advocates, a stronger California network of advocates, and to thank you for this work and for committing to it. It's taken us a while to get up and running with the Select Committee, but the work has been underway all along with particularly the chairwoman and some of the members here today. And I know that having the visibility of this Select Committee, we are going to be as successful as I think certainly the black men and boys of color have been in moving an agenda forward where those young people came forward, and 8 of the 9 pieces of legislation that they presented in the last bill cycle was signed by the governor, and that's the advocacy, and I know that we're going to step up and be equally successful thanks to your work. Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I agree. We've had 3 of those select committee hearings. We have 1 more, and they have been from San Jose to Stockton to LA and going back to Southern California once again, and Ms. Brown will be hosting that one. So thank you, Madam Speaker, for those comments. I was going to ask Senator Jackson to speak and make some opening remarks, but I'm going to have her hold her comments because she is also going to be introducing the first speaker. So we'll give her the mic once, and then she can go from one end to the other. I will now call on Assemblymember Gonzalez.
Thank you. You know, I'm excited to be here as the chair of the Select Committee on Women in the Workplace, and the intersection between that and the wage gap for women, particularly of color. I'm the product of a single mom who worked hard as a nurse and never seemed to be able to quite get where she would need to be. Until, of course, that she was able to have a union contract. We know that there is one real solution to the wage gap, especially for low-wage workers and women of color, and that is a good, strong union contract. Unfortunately, because so much of that is governed by national policy, in California, we can do what we can to ensure a strong labor movement. Again, the only way we can ensure true pay equity in just about every field we try to. But in the meantime, unfortunately, because of the federal policies and really a disbalance of our rights to organize and to have union jobs, we need to pass legislation that allows women who are not in unions or who are not organizable to also have those opportunities. So I'm happy to be here today and hear about solutions. I always put it in that sense because we know what the most obvious solution would be if we had the will at the national level and even sometimes in the state to ensure that more women, especially women of color, are unionized. We know that minimum wage workers in particular, federally throughout the nation, 23% of them are women of color, despite the fact that we're 16% of the population. We have been traditionally put into jobs that have been devalued and disvalued, and that obviously is one of the factors. But we also know where those opportunities exist, particularly in our unionized trades, that we can abolish pay disparities. And we know, of course, that it's not just a job in a non-traditional field, but a union job in a non-traditional field. Quite frankly, 95% of the women who've completed an apprenticeship program came from a union apprenticeship program. We know what works. We have the formula, and it's just creating the political will to ensure that we can actually implement that. So I'm excited to be here today to have this conversation, to continue these conversations, and ensure that in California that we continue to work to make life better for all women, and especially women of color. Thank you.
Thank you. And I feel very honored to have 2 of my colleagues here, so I'm going to open the floor to them. Assemblymember Cristina Garcia, if you'd like to say a few comments.
I just want to thank our colleagues for coming together and finding this, addressing this intersection and the collaboration. I think maybe it's unique to the Women's Caucus, but doing that work, and everyone here who's participating and testifying, thank you for your efforts out there. I have someone from my district here today, so I know it's a long commute out here. Thank you for coming this way. But I'm here more than anything to learn and listen and figure out how I could be part of the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia.
Madam Chair and members of the Select Committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in what should be a very constructive discussion about the barriers that exist in our communities for young women of color throughout California. I'm honored to be part of this group of very intelligent, strong women who are reflective of the type of women and role models that I, for one, have seen in folks like my mother and other strong women that I want to make sure that we continue to advocate on behalf. And those of you who know me, I have a 1-year-old little girl. Her name is Alla Mae, and it is you all who I think will set the bar in terms of what she should aspire to do and be, when she grows up. And so for me, it's an honor to participate in these conversations. Know that at the district level, the select committee and the work that we are talking about here is taking place in the 56th Assembly District in conjunction with the Select Committee on Boys and Men of Color. And I can't say enough how honored I am to be able to share this space with all of you and get to work on this. So thank you for the opportunity to participate.
You're welcome, and we have less than 16 years to make that happen by the time she graduates from high school. And we're honored to have Lupita Cortez Alcala from the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls here, so the floor is yours to say some comments.
Thank you so much, Chair Campos, and many of the colleagues on the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls that are here. And I know in the audience is our Executive Director, Nancy Kirshner-Rodriguez, and we'll be joined by another Commissioner, Lori Damrell, a little later today. So thank you so much for allowing us to co-sponsor. And we're so very committed to supporting women of color in California. But my own personal experience, some of you may know I'm a big STEM advocate, but I'm also a big CTE advocate in general. I think that more women and girls, I have a daughter myself, she's 6, need these opportunities and access to equitable wages, quite frankly. And so I know together we can find ways to end the gender wage gap for women of color and to ensure all women in California have access to this opportunity. But in order for the progress to be made, the state better needs data and greater accountability related to the implementation of laws that are already on the books. The Commission has an important role in the oversight and implementation of laws impacting women, and all Californians should benefit from an investment of taxpayers' resources and collecting and analyzing data through a gender and race lens. It's critical to using these resources fairly and efficiently. These data need to be cross-tabulated by race and gender so that we can get a true picture and can begin to tease out where more efforts are needed. And I'm glad the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls can play an active role in contributing to this important conversation. I hope that we will be able to contribute our resources and expertise to evaluating existing data and identifying gaps, among other things. So, again, I use this opportunity to also learn and see how the Commission can be helpful in helping address the issues that this information hearing will uncover today. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And I'd like to recognize Senator Jackson and her opening remarks, and then you can go into the first speaker for the panel. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for putting this together. I think it's going to be very helpful as we hopefully are able to play off of the equal pay bill that we all worked together last year to pass. And I jokingly say it was a 35-year overnight success. But without the support of everyone in this room and the advocates who were there, we really would not have seen this come to fruition. And it is my hope that this will be a model for the rest of the country. We were able to get not only bipartisan support, we actually almost had unanimous support. We had the support of the business community because they know that when you don't have this kind of equal opportunity, equal parity, that women leave billions and billions of dollars on the table that doesn't otherwise go back into the economy. So it is a win-win situation. But it took 35 years. It probably took more than that. I can only say I was working on that issue back in the days when I was appointed by Jerry Brown I to serve on the Commission on the Status of Women at that time. We fought for that as well without any success. But I believe that with our male counterparts as well as the women in this room and men who agree with, appreciate equality, and, oh, by the way, have daughters, this is going to be a critical help, and it's something we need to do, and we need to do it with a sense of urgency. It has been far too long. We have far too many women who are hovering close to or at the poverty line, who are trying to support themselves or their families. We know that women now, over 50% of all women are in the workforce. Women work because they have to work. They need the money to support themselves and their families. And that we know that the overwhelming majority of women who are working today are either the sole breadwinner, the primary breadwinner, or whose income is critical for the necessities of life for their families. It is a world that has not gotten better for women of color. Perhaps we could argue it's gotten worse, but it's not a worthy argument to have. The fact is that women are not being paid properly, and women of color suffer even more. So I look forward to what we're going to hear today. The issues are complicated. I just wrote down a few things. Occupations. We have gender discrimination in various occupations. We need to change that. We need to put women into what are otherwise non-traditional careers. But I can tell you as a child, when I was growing up as a young girl, you never thought of the notion of Madam Speaker. You never thought of the notion of Madam Secretary, and you certainly never thought of the notion of Madam President. We have a little work to do there, but I think it's really important that girls see other women as role models, and that boys see it too. And so I will be very interested in hearing what our speakers have to say. And in that regard, let me ask Jennifer Reich to step forward. She is the legal director of the Equal Rights Advocates, who were an enormous help in helping us draft and pass SB 358 last year. She specializes in representing low-wage and immigrant workers in individual and class action suits, challenging discrimination, wage and hour violations, and other unlawful but prevalent business practices. She was, and this organization has been an active partner in the Stronger California Advocates Network. And thanks to you here in this room and in this dais, the work that we're doing on behalf of creating a stronger California, we are speaking with a stronger voice. Hopefully we are not terrorizing the opposition, but we are certainly making them appreciate and understand that we are here, that we are real, and that we are going to get the job done. And without the work of Jennifer and the ERA, our equal pay measure would have been far more challenging. I also need to shout out groups like the AAUW and the NWPC for their work as well, and a variety of women's organizations. Our Commission on the Status of Women, I think, has got an excellent approach right now to trying to get accountability. Let's get the data. Let's demonstrate the realities that we know all exist. And with that, I look forward to Jennifer's presentation. And on behalf, I think, of all of us here in the dais, thank you for the great work you've done and the work yet to be done.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for the opportunity to testify today. As the Senator said, my name is Jennifer Reich, and I am the legal director with Equal Rights Advocates. ERA is a nonprofit civil rights and legal advocacy organization that's based in San Francisco, and we've been at the forefront of the movement for gender equality for over 40 years, since our founding in 1974. Our mission is to protect and expand access and opportunity for women and girls in education and employment through a combination of high-impact litigation, direct legal services, community education and outreach, and innovative policy reform initiatives. And one of those initiatives is what brings us here today. As chair of the Stronger California campaign, ERA is partnering with visionary legislators, like many of you here today, and a network of more than 24 organizations from across the state to champion a comprehensive legislative agenda that will lift up economic opportunity for all the women in this state. Because we know that women are drivers of the California economy, that we are leaders in our communities, and we are the backbone of millions of families. We are nearly half the workforce, and we're breadwinners in most households. We're raising the next generation of Californians, and we are caregiving for our elders. We're entrepreneurs, we're builders, and for all of these contributions and more, we are ready to be recognized and paid as equals. Because right now in 2016, women are still not getting the equal pay we deserve. Even in California, where we recently enacted the strongest equal pay law in the country, across occupations, at every education level, in cities and towns across this state, working women are paid less than men. An average of 84 cents to the dollar when you compare the median annual income of women working full-time, year-round, to that of full-time working men. This punishing wage gap is costing California women and their families over $39 billion every year. But while we have made some progress in narrowing the overall wage gap in California over the past 10 years, we've seen it go from 79 cents on the dollar to 84 cents between 2004 and 2014. The wage gaps for women of color, who are, as Assemblymember Campos pointed out, more than half of California's female population, are far greater and in some cases have gotten even worse. Latinas now make less than 43 cents on the dollar, according to the latest census figures that came out in the late part of last year, compared with the average earnings of white men. And African American women's earnings are only slightly greater, but still stand at just 60% of white men's average yearly income. These tremendous wage gaps are fueling higher poverty rates and hampering financial stability for millions of women of color in this state, and undermining the economic security of the families that they support. So we need to get to the bottom of what is driving these disparities and find solutions to close them. And the time to act is now. Equal pay has been getting a lot more attention in recent years, but when we think about what it will take to achieve pay equity, that is, what we mean when we talk about fair pay, we know it is going to take more than laws that guarantee equal pay for equal work. We need to understand and dismantle the structural barriers and transform the economic realities that are behind this persistent wage gap facing women, and especially women of color, in this state. Because women of color are not just being paid less to do the same work, they are too often not being paid fairly in the jobs they hold. They make up a disproportionate percentage of the workers who are paid the minimum wage or less in this state, which, even at the $10 per hour that recently took effect, is still not enough to support a family. A woman working 50 weeks a year, 40 hours a week, at the minimum wage and having to support 2 children would still be living under the federal poverty threshold. And we all know that the federal poverty threshold doesn't even take into account the higher costs of living and other sources of expense for living here in this great state. Low-wage women, and especially immigrant women, are also the most vulnerable to wage theft, and too often left without recourse when their wages are stolen. And we know that we've taken some action to strengthen our laws about wage theft, but we need to remember that in order to fix that problem, we're going to need to address the underlying economic realities that are driving down wages and driving employers to a race to the bottom in the first place. Because not only are women of color disproportionately concentrated in jobs that pay low wages, they are the predominant workforce in occupations like domestic work, childcare, and home health care that are critical to California economy, in fact, enable millions of Californians to do their jobs, but have been systematically devalued and categorically excluded from many of the basic labor rights and protections that are afforded to other California workers. We can change that. We know that there are more than 2 sides to the occupational segregation coin, because the wage gap is not just the result of women of color being over-concentrated in low-paying jobs or stuck in the low-status positions of many occupations, the so-called pink-collar ghetto. It is also due to the underrepresentation of women, and especially women of color, in the higher-paid occupations and industries that traditionally have been dominated by men and, not coincidentally, paid higher wages. These include fields like construction and the construction-related trades, which is one of the booming industries in California that is fueling our recovery from the recession and makes up close to 5% of all of the jobs. In those fields, women's numbers are extremely low, and they've been stagnant for decades, even while women's share of management positions in a lot of white-collar professional fields has grown significantly. And we know that it's not because women can't do this work. Women's participation in other physically demanding non-traditional fields like public safety and firefighting has increased significantly in the past 20 years, although I will say The numbers are still not where we want them to be, but they have grown a lot. But the number of women in construction trades jobs in California still stands at less than 2.5%. This is one of the largest segments of the California economy, and women are not in it. Apprenticeship is a key pathway to these higher-paying non-traditional careers, yet among the more than 53,000 apprentices in California, 70% of whom are doing apprenticeships in the construction trades, only 5.6% are women. That includes women who are in apprenticeships and programs that lead to careers in the lower paying and traditionally female-dominated fields like home health care and cosmetology. If you take those away, then you're looking at a number of women that may be as low as hundreds. And women of color, even though they make up 50% of the women in apprenticeships, that's still 50% of a very, very small number. We can do better, and we have to do better. We also know that the wage gap starts with an education gap, because women and girls, and again, particularly women and girls of color, in part because they are overrepresented in lower income communities, they lack equal and adequate access to the opportunities to get the education and the job and vocational training that they need to get into the higher paid, high skilled jobs pipeline. Career and technical education has been the focus of a lot of recent efforts on the part of the legislature, and it's an area where we really need to look closely at how we're spending our money and whether it's being spent in a way that's serving the people who need it most. We need to ensure that the data we're collecting and that we're evaluating will allow us to measure our success there and measure the outcomes of those programs to ensure that women and girls of color are being adequately served. The same goes for programs in workforce development, which are about to receive an infusion of a lot of funding as a result of President Obama's initiative and the federal funding that's coming through the Workforce Investment Act, Opportunities and Investment Act, or WIOA. And we really need to look at what those one-stop centers are doing. Where are they sending workers? Who's going into what occupations? Are we just perpetuating the wage gap by channeling women, and especially women of color, only into the lower paid jobs? And are we adequately supporting the personnel in those one-stop centers so that they know about things like apprenticeship and where to send people who might be interested and qualified for those types of opportunities? So all of these statistics about the gender wage gap, they can be very daunting, but they shouldn't stun us into silence, and they shouldn't lull us into inaction, because there are tremendous opportunities in front of us right now. We have amazing leaders here in the legislature, many of whom I'm looking at, and we have an opportunity to capitalize on the momentum that we've been building. The statistics tell us that what we need to do is be creative and courageous, and to remember, in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose birthday we celebrated yesterday, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And it's time for us to get on top of that arc and carry it forward. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over back to Assemblywoman Campos to introduce the first panel. You'll be hearing stories today from women and experts in the field who will tell you the real human story behind these numbers. And I hope that you all take the information today and seek us out whenever you need more. And we look forward to working with you to make a stronger California this year and in the future. Thank you.